Hello, welcome everybody. Buenas tardes, buenos días. Es un gusto para mí recibirlos. Mi nombre es Ana Elena González Treviño, quien los saluda desde el Centro de Estudios Mexicanos de la UNAM en el Reino Unido. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you, as well as Dr. Amy Fuller, who is our guest speaker today from Nottingham Trent University. I was very glad to find out that she organized a very relevant event to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the conquest of Mexico 500 years ago. And we are very happy to know that there are studies of Mexican history done in the UK. I will tell you a little bit about her, and then we shall proceed to listen to her presentation. Dr. Amy Fuller is Senior Lecturer in the History of the Americas at Nottingham Trent University. She was awarded her PhD in Spanish Studies from the University of Manchester in 2010. And her first book, Between Two Worlds, The Autos Sacramentales of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, was published in 2015. Aside from her work on Sor Juana, she has written on topics such as the conquest of Mexico, Mexican folklore, the Day of the Dead, and conversion and religious drama in colonial Mexico. She also co-edited Religion and Conflict in Medieval and Early Modern Worlds, Identities, Communities, and Authorities, published this year in 2021. Which featured her essay, Papa Don't Preach Abortion and Womanly Sin and Morality Place of Early Modern Mexico. Amy's research has been published by History Today, BBC History Magazine, and Mexicolor. She has also featured on BBC Radio 4. The program is Front Row, the forum on BBC World Service, and the History Today, and not just the Tudors podcast. How fascinating, Amy. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation on this event. And we are really looking forward to listening to your presentation.
Okay, can you all hear me? Yes. Okay. So thank you. Many thanks to UNAM UK and in particular Ana Elena for inviting me to speak to you all today. I hope you enjoy this presentation. So I'm going to share my screen now so that I can share my PowerPoint. Okay. Hopefully. Okay, has that worked?
No, not yet.
Oh, no?
No.
Okay, I'll try again. Sorry.
It's okay. There.
Okay.
It's fine. Now just the presentation mode, and it's there. It is perfect.
Okay, so the reason I'm here today is because, of course, there are many events taking place this year to commemorate the 500-year anniversary of the fall of Tenochtitlan. But what does Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz and her autos sacramentales in particular have to do with this? Well, as I'm sure you all know, Juana, before she became Sor Juana, lived and worked at the viceregal court, and she kept these close ties when she joined the Hieronymite convent of Santa Paula. For example, she was commissioned to help create a triumphal arch for the arrival of the new viceroy and vicereine, the Marqués and Marchioness of La Laguna in 1680, the very same vicereine who would later become her patroness and help publish her works. And this celebration itself was a commemoration of the conquest and a reaffirming of New Spain's connection to its Old World counterpart. For example, the procession of an incoming viceroy would follow the routes that Cortés took from Veracruz to Mexico City, then of course Tenochtitlan, acknowledging the part played by different groups in the conquest, such as the Tlaxcalans. So given that she played a role in these celebrations, it's not surprising that some of her works would explore the discovery and conquest of the so-called New World. So, for those who don't know, I'm going to tell you what an auto sacramental is, just in case you're unaware. So an auto sacramental is a one-act play. They're performed on the Feast of Corpus Christi to celebrate the Eucharist, and they were written to provide theological instruction. They typically feature allegorical characters, and they would be performed on floats or carros, so wheeled platforms that carried towering structures of scenery. And this would happen during the procession itself, but they would also perform some of the scenes on tablados, or fixed stages inside or at the door of a church or cathedral. And that's where the procession would start, and that's where the procession would end. Special effects were often also employed, with fireworks being a particular favourite, providing a multi-sensory experience. Rather abstract and unlikely themes would often be employed in the composition of an auto, which would then be transformed into a dramatic representation of the death of Christ, ending with the implementation and exaltation of the Eucharist in remembrance of his sacrifice. These plays were often employed for conversion purposes in colonial Mexico in order to teach the Nahua about the mystery of the Eucharist. Franciscan friars in particular would employ this technique, in which native actors would perform autos in Nahuatl in order to reach a wider audience. The idea of autos as teaching tools is reinforced in Sor Juana's own plays, which are preceded by introductory loas that showcase characters ignorant of the true meaning of the Eucharist. The characters from the loas then became an allegorical audience for the autos, the main part of the play that would follow, which are presented in a way to educate those very characters within the play itself. Sor Juana's three autos have different themes. We have El Mártir del Sacramento San Hermenegildo, which is historical, based on the story of a 6th century Visigothic martyr prince. We have El Cetro de José, which is biblical, based on the Old Testament story of Joseph. And we have El Divino Narciso, which is based on Ovid's mythological Narcissus. And the diversity of these subjects is testament to their traditional nature, as these plays would often draw inspiration from a variety of sources, with Melvina McKendrick explaining that, and I quote, "The justification for this was that the Eucharist lay at the heart of Catholicism's theological and ethical system. Everything that had gone before found its culmination and resolution in Christ's atonement. Everything since derived meaning from it." So indeed, an auto sacramental could be about anything. And indeed, Bruce Wardropper attests to the Feast of Corpus Christi itself as being one that glorifies not a past event, but an ever-present miracle. Now, just to give you an overview, El Mártir del Sacramento San Hermenegildo is an auto historial, as I've said. It's based on the story of a Visigothic martyr prince who was executed by order of his father for converting from their Arian faith to Catholicism. It begins with Hermenegild and his father Lieverd about to go to war with each other over Hermenegild's renunciation of Arianism. Lieverd attempts to dissuade his son from rebelling against him and encourages him to convert back, first with kindness and then with threats. This auto culminates with an Arian bishop providing the demonic presence, attempting to trick Hermenegild into taking communion. Hermenegild's refusal leads to his execution, which is presented as a martyrdom, symbolizing Christ's victory on the cross. Hermenegild is described as the corn, sowing the seed of faith, as his brother Recared is able to use the example of Hermenegild's death to convert the Visigoths to Catholicism, which represents the redemption of mankind. El Cetro de Joseph uses Genesis 37 to 50 as its main source, charting Joseph's rise to prominence from being sold into slavery by his brothers to saving Egypt from famine. The Satan character is played by Lucero, who has been cast out of heaven and is upset and angry at God for banishing him. Realizing Joseph's future significance as savior of the world, Lucero plots to lead Joseph astray by having Potiphar's wife try to seduce him. The victory in El Cetro de Joseph is demonstrated by Joseph's ability to correctly interpret the Pharaoh's dreams, becoming Salvador del Mundo after saving Egypt from famine. The importance of bread in the Old Testament story is emphasized throughout the play and is shown to be the antecedent of the Eucharist, which in turn will lead to mankind's redemption. El Divino Narciso uses a combination of Ovid's myth from the Metamorphoses and sections from the Gospels and the Song of Songs. The image of the beautiful Narcissus signifies the beauty of Christ. And whereas Sor Juana's Narciso approaches when Sor Juana's Narciso approaches the fountain, he sees the reflection of naturaleza humana, who is his image, and he falls in love with her. The demonic presence in this representation is played by Echo, who wishes to stop Narciso from reaching naturaleza humana in order to prevent mankind's redemption. Echo tempts Narciso with wealth and riches, but is rejected. Echo then tries to muddy the water in the pool to stop Narciso from falling in love with naturaleza humana. This fails, however, and upon seeing her, Narciso realizes that he must die in order to save her. Here we find the victory over the devil. As Narciso dies, he transforms into the sacrament of the Eucharist, with which mankind can be redeemed. Now, it has been claimed that Sor Juana's autos were written for the Marchiones de la Laguna, and that all three were intended for performance at court in Madrid. However, there's no such evidence for the other autos. We have no performance history for the autos. And it's clear that these works were meant to be read as plays due to the inclusion of stage directions. And it would seem also that they were intended to be read together as a collection. Sor Juana's three autos sacramentales and their respective loas were only ever published together as a collection in Seville in 1692. The segundo volumen was circulated in manuscript form in order to be read by various eminent figures from Seville, who then went on to compose poems and dedications for the publication of the volume. In their original sequence, we have the progression of the Eucharist from corn to bread to sacrament. However, the ordering of the autos as a collected works was subsequently modified for Méndez Plancarte's 1950s editions of Sor Juana's Obras Completas, within which El Divino Narciso is placed first instead of last, El Mártir del Sacramento San Hermenegildo is placed second instead of first, and El Cetro de Joseph is presented last instead of second. And having completely rearranged the autos' original order, the modern edition of Sor Juana's Obras does not retain the original sense of these plays as a whole, but rather treats them as individual works independent of one another. And in presenting them in this way, the impact of the autos as a collection is lost. Now, the second volume of Sor Juana's works was quite a departure from the tone of the first, which focused heavily on her poetic genius as a favourite of the viceregal court of New Spain. In contrast, the segundo volumen gave Sor Juana the opportunity to present herself as a serious theological authority and to demonstrate her ability as a playwright. In fact, each volume of Sor Juana's works seems to have been carefully planned in terms of their content, in order to demonstrate the 3 stages of her life: at court, in the convent, and her saintly transformation and exemplary death. If such planning had gone into the presentation of each volume, it would be reasonable to argue that the autos were also arranged in a specific order. This second volume of Sor Juana's works also included the Crisis, or Carta Atenegórica, which opens the volume and explores the subject of Christ's greatest gift to mankind, or his mayor fineza, a subject that would be continued in the introductory loa. The loas that introduce Sor Juana's autos sacramentales are joined together in their universal discussion of Spain's transatlantic expansion. Now, at first glance, this would seem to have very little to do with the sacrament to which they are dedicated. Nevertheless, the loas present the discovery, conquest, and conversion of the New World as tropes for the Eucharist. These common themes also provide another element linking the autos sacramentales, demonstrating their purpose as a collection. The loa for El Mártir del Sacramento San Hermenegildo, which is the first to appear within the volume, deals with the very first act of Spain's transatlantic expansion, the so-called discovery of the New World by Columbus. And it also represents new advances within the realms of theological debate, returning to the subject of the Crisis. In this loa, Sor Juana evokes Charles V's very own motto of plus ultra, illustrating Spain's imperial expansion and providing a nod to the Spanish Habsburg royal family. Here we find the notion of mayor fineza being taken to the New World. In the auto, Spain's first Catholic martyr is presented as the one who enabled the conversion of the Visigoths and the Spanish people overall as a result. This imagery is juxtaposed with that of the loa, in which Columbus discovers the Americas, meaning that the indigenous people of Mexico can also be converted. So we're just going to take a closer look at that loa for a little bit. So the loa that introduces El Mártir del Sacramento San Hermenegildo is presented in the style of a philosophical dialogue, similar to those written by Augustine of Hippo in 386, which were in turn based on the dialogues of Plato. The loa appears to borrow particularly from Augustine's Contra Academicos, which is quite appropriate as a source for the loa because it showcases a debate for which logic is unable to provide an answer, and knowledge or scientific learning is exposed as inadequate when faith is lacking. So the loa opens with 2 students debating some issue of which the audience is as yet unaware. Though one student says that they agree with the opinion of Augustine and the other agrees with Aquinas. A third character, identified as Estudiante Tres, but also referred within the text as Maestro, enters and joins the debate, asserting that he will act as judge and decide whose point of view is correct. The audience discover that they are debating the issue of Christ's mayor fineza, or the greatest gift that Christ gave to mankind, which the reader, if they were continuing to read the volume, will remember from the Carta Atenegórica earlier in the volume, in which Sor Juana refutes the arguments of the Portuguese Jesuit Vieira, who argues against the Church Fathers on this subject. So, the opinion within the loa of the first student within this debate follows Augustine. He says that having died for mankind was Christ's mayor fineza, or greatest gift, whereas according to the second student and the opinion of Aquinas, The gift that demonstrates Christ's greatest display of love for mankind was to have remained in the sacrament of the Eucharist. Once the two students have presented their ideas and their sides of the argument, the third student, the maestro, informs them that he wishes to propose his own idea on the subject. Suddenly, however, the scholastic atmosphere is destroyed as Hercules and a troop of soldiers appear. The soldiers declare that this is the end of the world. They are putting up pillars to indicate that there is no more world than that which Hercules discovered. And to illustrate this point, a choir sing, non plus ultra, aquí acaba el universo. They explain that over the centuries, no man has dared to go further and conclude that therefore this must be the world's end. This demonstration leads the first two students lost and completely confused, without any idea what the third student, El Maestro, is attempting to argue. They are aware of the deeds of Hercules and other such legendary figures, but they can't comprehend how that has anything to do with the debate at hand. To make things even more confusing, Columbus then enters with his soldiers in tow, having returned to Spain from his voyage past the columns of Hercules and across the Atlantic to the New World. He proclaims that, in fact, there is plus ultra. The ancients were wrong to be so proud and insist that there was nothing more beyond the pillars, and that furthermore they have seen it. Más mundos hay, más imperios. By daring to go further, Columbus has usurped the throne of Hercules. He has proven that there is more world to be seen. There is plus ultra, and in so doing, he has erased Hercules' mark on the map. This reversal of the Herculean marker is a clear reference to the Habsburg imperial dictum of overseas expansion, which repealed the inscription non plus ultra on the columns of Hercules. In the lower, Sor Juana presents Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic and the discovery of a new world, daring to go further past the pillars thanks to backing from the Spanish crown. She shows this as the first step in taking the finezas or gifts of Christ to the indigenous people of the empire. Now, the warning to sailors and navigators not to go further than the Pillars of Hercules, as there was nothing more to be seen, or even worse, mortal danger, mirrors the debate that takes place in the Loa. In discussing the issue of the greatest demonstration of Christ's love for mankind, students 1 and 2 each side with a different church father. Therefore, by doing so, each student has a safe answer to give, a tried and tested model within which context they can safely debate the issue of the greatest gift of Christ that Christ gave to mankind. In so doing, they are not crossing any boundaries, non plus ultra. The third student, however, has other ideas. He wishes to demonstrate that there is plus ultra. You can go further and prove that there is more to be said than that which has already been discussed. He goes further, not in terms of imperial expansion, but within the realms of theological debate, using plus ultra as a metaphor. This idea of further exploration seems to be a slight departure from Sor Juana's ideas in the Crisis, in which she defends the established arguments of Augustine, Aquinas, and Chrysostom. But it is also fitting as a justification of this further discussion in her Autos Sacramentales, and also provides context for examining the conversion of the Naua in the subsequent Loas. The two younger students are still very confused, and the entrance of Columbus did nothing to further their understanding of the maestro's arguments. Estudiante 3, therefore, explains to them the significance of these strange goings-on. He has not conjured up these characters by magic, rather they are part of a theatrical performance. The maestro wishes to use their arguments allegorically in order to create a loa to introduce an auto on the subject of the Visigothic martyr prince Hermenegild. But students 1 and 2 are still unaware of the point that the third student is attempting to illustrate. They cannot connect the figures of Hercules and Columbus to this debate going on. Why use such subjects to explore such a topic when biblical characters would be much more appropriate? This, of course, mirrors the response that Sor Juana gets from the Bishop of Puebla to her carta atenegórica. Why don't you use the scriptures? The maestro, therefore, attempts to clarify that he is using these images in an allegorical manner in order to illustrate what he believes to be Christ's mayor fineza, or his greatest gift. Hercules did not think that there was any more world than that which had been discovered, but by taking to the sea, Columbus proved this to be untrue. The first student suddenly realizes what his maestro has been talking about. They need to look further, beyond the ideas that had been previously discussed. The maestro then relates this back to the debate at hand, exploring the issues and events that occurred before the crucifixion, the Last Supper, and the washing of the feet of the disciples. The third student uses the authority of both St. Augustine and St. Bernard in order to demonstrate his point that there was more to Christ's love for mankind than simply his suffering on the cross. Here, the third student cites Augustine, who discusses how Christ's love for mankind was also demonstrated through his humility, exemplified by his willingness to wash the feet of his disciples despite being the Son of God. This act, according to Augustine, was all part of the Last Supper, not a separate event. The maestro explains that Christ's finezas were many, and he wishes to expand the debate further in order to demonstrate the many forms that these gifts took. Together, Christ's finezas would form a part of his mayor fineza, his greatest gift, which would be revealed to the other students later on in the debate. It could be argued that the point the maestro is trying to make, that Christ gave many different gifts of love to mankind, is illustrated through the presentation of Sor Juana's autos, as each one represents a different gift, a different fineza. The mystery regarding which of these gifts was the greatest would be revealed at the end of the final auto in the sequence, with the death of Narciso and the redemption of mankind. In his discussion, the third student also evokes the name of Hugh of St. Cher, who contributed to the institution of the Feast of Corpus Christi. In doing so, the maestro illustrates the development of the finezas, demonstrating the continuation of Christ's love after the crucifixion, the subsequent implementation of the Eucharist, and celebration of the sacrament at the very festival during which the autos would be performed. The maestro therefore expands the limits of this debate, further demonstrating that scope for discussion on the subject of Christ's mayor fineza extends before and after the death of Christ. The auto performed to illustrate the points debated in the lower would explore the question of Christ's greatest display of love for mankind through the reenactment of the story of Saint Hermenegild. The Visigothic prince was martyred at Easter, thereby coinciding with Christ's self-sacrifice for mankind. His mayor fineza, according to Augustine. The death of Hermenegild echoes that of Christ, and his brother Recared is able to use the memory of this act to convert the Visigoths to Catholicism. As a result, Hermenegild's own fineza, or gift, saves the sacrament of the Eucharist and his people from the Arian heresy. So in true Baroque form, Sor Juana takes two different opinions, that of Augustine and Aquinas, and merges them together to form the answer, thus explaining that Christ's greatest gift of love for mankind was not only to have died, but also to have remained in the sacrament of the Eucharist as an example and reminder of his self-sacrifice. Having therefore discovered the new world in the first lower, the second deals with the difficulty of persuading the indigenous people to renounce their idols. The lower, introducing the third and final auto, is concerned with the initial attempts to convert the Nahua after Mexico has been conquered. This lower similarly sets out the correct way for the native peoples to sacrifice, going back to the initial contact between the Mexica and those bringing the true God in order to convert them. The lower ends with these new converts and subjects of the crown returning to thank those who had facilitated their conversion. In each lower, we find characters who are either in the know or not in the know, with knowledgeable characters introducing the topic of the Eucharist to the others who are in some way ignorant of the true meaning behind the divine sacrament. Lessons on the Eucharist will be delivered in the form of autos to these characters, thereby providing an allegorical audience for the performance. By using the dictum plus ultra to begin the collection, Sor Juana provides a nod to the Spanish crown, and the loas in turn explore the benefits of this plus ultra, the bringing of the faith and Christ's mayor fineza to the so-called New World. This dictum of imperial expansion is not one that only illustrates the arguments of the maestro as something new within the realms of theological debate, but is also an integral part of Sor Juana's own iconography. She herself is being presented within the frontispiece of her third posthumous volume as a triumphant exotic muse. And these images thus present a merging of the old world with the new, with Sor Juana situated between these pillars of Hercules. Sor Juana is presented as an exotic muse and an example of the wonderful bounty of the new world. And this is also demonstrated not only within this image, but also by those praising her at the beginning of each of her volumes. In the segundo volumen, we find a poem praising Juana Inés by Gabriel Álvarez de Toledo Pellicer, in which he describes her as being del Parnaso Americano, and a romance by Juan Bautista Sandy de Uribe names her as Americana Nympha. We also find an approval from Ambrosio de la Cuesta, the canon of the Metropolitan Church of Seville, who describes her as a rich treasure of the New World. Now we find these tropes in all of the volumes. Kind of the beginning of each volume is full of them, and they continue. This imagery continues to the final volume. In her Fama y Obras Póstumas, a letter to Doña Piñatele de Aragon, the Duchess of Monteleon and Marquess of the Valley of Oaxaca, from Don Juan Ignacio de Castorena y Ursua, who describes Juana Inés as having hailed from a place that, with its twin-peaked mountains, emulated Parnassus. And in terms of the presentation of Sor Juana's image, the nun inhabited the same Baroque mythical landscape projected in her Autos Sacramentales. This same letter, directed to a descendant of Cortés himself, uses Sor Juana as an example highlighting the importance of Plus Ultra. Don Juan Ignacio de Castorena y Ursua praises the conquistador for his efforts, without which such glorious bounty would not have been found. Now, aside from the use of Plus Ultra as a metaphor for pushing boundaries, both in terms of imperial expansion and theological debate, it would be naive not to also explore the possibility that this statement was a nod to the Spanish royal family. There is an acknowledgement of the Habsburgs' links to the Visigoths within El Mártir del Sacramento San Hermenegildo itself, which certainly in some form exemplifies a quest for patronage. A patronal connection would in fact continue after Sor Juana's death, as the first edition of her posthumous works, published in Madrid in 1700, was dedicated to Mariana de Neoburgo, Queen Consort to Spain from 1689 to 1700. This theory is confirmed when we look at the last few verses in the loa for El Mártir del Sacramento San Hermenegildo. By this point, it has been announced by the third student that an auto will be performed in order to explain to the students how there is plus ultra with reference to the issue of Christ's Mayor Fineza and the sacrament of the Eucharist. Estudiante 3, or the maestro, has already mentioned that the auto will take Saint Hermenegild as its inspiration. This choice of protagonist and the Visigothic subject matter in general was very much in vogue at the time. The Visigoths experienced a renewal of interest in the 16th century, thanks to Philip II's relic collection at the Escorial, which included those of Hermenegild. And royal chroniclers were at pains to emphasize the continuity of the royal blood from the Visigoths to the present day. Sor Juana's loas take the unification of Spain and the Habsburgs with their Visigothic ancestors one step further. Whereas the auto will present the importance of this first Spanish martyr in converting Spain to Catholicism, the loa provides the consequence of Hermenegild's so-called descendants' overseas exploration, and that they can spread his example to a whole new world because they dared to go further. Now, Sor Juana would have been fully aware of Habsburg devotion to their Visigothic forebears, and so she alludes to this tradition at the end of the loa. By having Hermenegild as a protagonist for one of her autos and presenting him as a Christ-like figure, Sor Juana effectively portrays the Habsburgs as having divine ancestry. Having presented the links between the Habsburgs and the Visigothic martyr prince, the maestro paves the way for the other students as the allegorical audience to watch the auto, which will demonstrate to them that in terms of the debate on Christ's Mayor Fineza, there is plus ultra, there is more to be done. The loa for El Mártir del Sacramento San Hermenegildo opens the sequence of the autos by revisiting a recurring theme in the volume, as we've discussed, La Mayor Fineza, or God's greatest gift to mankind. Now, having refuted Vieira in her Crisis at the start of this segundo volumen, Sor Juana reopens this debate in an allegorical classroom, where it is demonstrated that there is still more to discuss, indicating that Christ's gifts to mankind did not end with his death on the cross. Likewise, despite the ancients' warning that there was nothing beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Spain dared to go further and discover a new world to which it could bring the gift of Christianity. The spreading of the true faith is placed at the heart of the imperial project, which in turn is presented as a continuation of the deeds of their Visigothic ancestor, Hermenegild. And along with the emphasis on the redemptive qualities of the Eucharist and the message concerning Christ's sacrifice for mankind, Each auto represents a different stage in the development of the sacrament. The first, about San Hermenegild, alludes heavily to Hermenegild's role as the corn in terms of his sowing of the seed of faith in the hearts of the Visigothic people, in particular with regards to his brother Recared, who converts the previously Arian population to Catholicism. El Techo de Joseph, paying homage to its biblical namesake, discusses the importance of bread at length, the bread of life that will later become the bread of the soul. The auto references both the bread of the Last Supper and that of the Eucharist, which commemorates this act. In turn, El Divino Narciso ends with a detailed discussion of the mystery itself and the transformation of Narcissus into the sacrament. This progression of corn to bread to sacrament demonstrates the importance of the auto's ordering, providing further evidence for the 1692 edition as the play's intended representation. Along with the subject of Mayor Finesa, the autos also deal with this central theme of imperial expansion, and in particular the bringing of the faith to the ignorant, idolatrous indigenous people of the New World as they're presented. This gift from Christ to man could in turn be interpreted as the Mayor Finesa of the Spanish crown to the native peoples, illustrated in the loas through the imperial expansion or plus ultra of Spanish overseas endeavour. Something that we shall discover is further demonstrated is further demonstrated by the Habsburgs' links to Hermenegild, the martyr of the sacrament. Now, by placing her autos and their loas back together as a collection in their original order, we can trace this progression of finesas, or gifts from Christ, that help lead mankind back to God's saving grace. Man's journey back to God is further exemplified by the progress made in the spiritual conquest, with the Nawa finally accepting the true faith in the final loa, the collection. The first edition of Sor Juana's second volume of works was, of course, published in Seville, the legendary founder of which was Hercules, who had erected the pillars at the Strait of Gibraltar, declaring that there was no more world left to find, non plus ultra. Seville is also supposedly the place of death of Hermenegild, depending on which sources you read. And the Visigothic martyr prince, who was presented as the first Catholic Spaniard in the early modern period. And Seville was, of course, also the base of operations for the so-called Indies. So this volume celebrates the conversion of the Visigoths that led to the eventual conversion of the Nawa, thanks to the self-styled descendants of Visigoths, on the 200-year anniversary of Columbus's voyage of discovery, which, according to the way it's presented, is what made it all possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. What a suggestive presentation. Thank you. I believe that we are all intrigued by this reading. And I would welcome everybody who is present here with us or people who are following us in social media to ask questions, either by writing them in the chat box here or in Facebook or YouTube. Or if you wish to address our speaker, just let us know and we may unmute you. One of the first things that strikes us is the breadth of knowledge and the sort of entitlement of such an authoritative figure as Sor Juana to manipulate, the narratives coming from so many different sources in order to formulate this erudite narrative of what happened and why it happened and how it should be recalled historically through the language of allegory. So I wonder how much of it was actually understood, or how easy would the language have been, or would the message be sort of sweetened in a way by combining a very elaborate language, the Baroque language, with some situations that were perhaps simplified so that you could get the gist of the message. What do you think of this?
So I think if we look at kind of other examples of actos sacramentales, like from Calderon, for example, they are hers are very much on a level, and I think with a lot of these kind of plays, there was often layers of understanding. So you would have the performance, which itself would be incredibly kind of elaborate and have lots of bells and whistles to entertain, and then you'd have stories that most people would know the story of, but then you'd have all of these added kind of layers, and I think it would depend on your level of kind of education as to what you would get from it. But she was very definitely showing off what she could do with these, how many levels can we fit together? And I think it was very much a kind of way of her, really taking the genre of the acto sacramental, which was always considered, Calderon was considered the master, but I think she was like, well, look what I can do with this. I can take it to a completely, the next level. And I think they worked in terms of, reading them. You could get a lot from just reading them, but if you performed them, then you would obviously get even more from them. And I would love to see them performed as a sequence. The whole thing would be spectacular to see from beginning to end, because they really do, they really are kind of meant to be together. And it's a shame almost to kind of pull them apart, because I don't know if that answered your question. Sorry.
No, that's
I just carried on.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And it also makes you wonder how far did she take part in the production itself, the concepts that were explained, that were portrayed in the floats or in the fixed stage. Did she intervene saying, no, that's not what what a thing looks like? Or
I think, unfortunately, we don't know if they were ever performed, because unfortunately, Calderon had such a monopoly of the genre, and they were really expensive plays to put on. And so usually it would be the town hall would be in charge of deciding, what plays that year would be performed for Corpus Christi. And they would often want a safe, tried and tested, Calderon was everyone's favorite. They know that, the crowds would come. And of course, it wasn't just about the plays themselves. Corpus Christi Festival would bring markets, and, it would be a whole big event for each town to get together, but also people would make money, similarly, to Carnival today, it's not just about the processions itself. And so there's a reluctance to have anyone but Calderon, unfortunately. We think perhaps El Divino Narciso might have been performed at court. But yeah, unfortunately, because of the way in which her, we have so little sources on Sor Juana because of her convent being kind of turned over and during the revolution, etc., and losing so many sources, that we we have no evidence that they were actually performed. But I imagine Sor Juana would have wanted to have her say at every level. I can't imagine that she would have given in to anyone. Yeah.
Yes.
She was a perfectionist, I think.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we have a comment from a question actually from Fernando Herrero, who says it's superb. One possible question: how do you put your readings of these autos and Sor Juana in general in relation to the general scholarship? How do you see the vitality of the Baroque in the Anglo world? Many thanks, Fernando. So I suppose, yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, she's not so well known here, and I would love it if we could kind of put on a performance of her plays and get her, more well known. There was a play about her in 2012 that was kind of about her life, but it was it was similar to the film that's on her life, and what I find is a bit of a shame is that people are more interested in kind of the controversies about her life that actually there's no real evidence to support them, such as the persecution, which I personally don't believe happened from the evidence I've seen, because the Inquisition loved her and praised her a lot. And there's so much focus on that when actually her works are phenomenal, and it would be great to actually, showcase what she could do as a playwright and a poet and a kind of literary superstar in general. I think we need to celebrate her works more than focusing on kind of gossip that we don't really, that there's no evidence for at all. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah, she's not particularly well known. Obviously there was the Netflix series, and yeah, I kind of got really interested in her because I love these kind of plays in general. But I'm a bit of a strange person. I'm a strange English person with this interest, because although there are experts in the Spanish Golden Age, for example, but there aren't many people in the UK who know of Sor Juana. So it's been great to be able to talk about her.
Yes, that's great. And it's also reminding me of, well, the court of Louis XIV. And I guess it was a fashion, the Baroque fashion, that indeed served to celebrate or to perform in a sort of wishful thinking way about the extent of an empire and what could be done and what was to be expected from the conquered people, no, in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have well, yes, he's saying cheers for English strangeness and strange Englishness. Yes. Yes, that's excellent. Yeah. Indeed, one wonders also about the circulation of literary works, whether dramatic or otherwise, along with the circulation of philosophic and religious works that got blended into this extraordinary mind in order to create something and hopefully produce it, at least in her mind. It must have been.
Yeah. I mean, we know that she put that some of the shorter plays were performed at court, but yeah, we don't know about the autos sacramentales, but they would have been phenomenal. And yeah, if anyone out there wants to put them on, I think we should. I'd be very happy to be involved in that.
That would be great indeed. Yes. Is there anybody else who would like to ask something or comment something? If anyone wishes to raise their hand, you could do it live as well. Well, I am fascinated by the significance of the Pillars of Hercules as the symbol of the known boundaries, which of course they are mythical, but at the same time, you gave us a photograph of these mountains. Can you tell us?
So sometimes the mountains of Gibraltar are known as the Pillars of Hercules as well. So obviously there were no real physical pillars, but it was the mountains that were used as, and then obviously the symbol became more kind of standard as actual pillars. But it's used everywhere. It's so it's really interesting when you start looking for these symbols, like these images, you see them everywhere. But I think also she was kind of using them herself as a kind of, because obviously she draws upon her carta atenegórica and the respuesta, in which she's really showing, like, you know, I can debate you, you know, theologically, you know, I can debate any man. and I think almost she may have been using these pillars as a kind of symbol for her own, you know, don't tell me that there's non plus ultra, there is plus ultra, and I will show you, because I can, you know, I can debate until you drop dead.
Of course.
But yeah, sorry, I don't know if that answered the question.
Oh yes, of course, indeed. So it can be read as well on many different levels, no? And how her own standing, I suppose, as a woman from a place that was despised up to a certain extent, except for its wealth, for its material wealth. So it's she's making a very big and eloquent claim for another way of looking at the new world. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Giuseppe, hi Giuseppe. He says, I very much enjoyed the 2004 Royal Shakespeare Company's production, House of Desires.
Oh, yeah.
Included Baroque plot devices. For the question is about marketing. For me, the question is about marketing. Yes, I think, nowadays, I think it could be done, but we need to find out how. Yeah. But I believe this is Catherine Boyle's translation, right? Of like Los Empeños de una Casa.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. I think her comedias always seem to get more attention than the autos. Maybe because the autos are so weird. I don't know if that puts people off. But that's what attracted me. I loved how weird they were. I loved how, you know, how completely just, it takes so many readings to just like, okay, what's going, you know, one of those films that you see that every time you see it, you see something new in it. And it takes so many readings of those plays to really get to you have to kind of strip the layers away each time.
To get a full enjoyment. Okay. Here, Giuseppe continues to write, it was bundled with other plays. So the idea of her as literary superstar is very interesting. She could be as popular as Frida Kahlo. Yes,
I think she could. You know, I think she definitely could. Yeah.
I was thinking also of the difficulty of setting plays like this, conversion plays in the present context. They're sort of a different tone, no? That present audiences might find it a bit difficult to relate. But still we have research groups such as Lelitiane, Lengua, Literatura y Teatro Novohispano. And with them, we recently showed a digital production of a play from the New Spain about the conversion of the four kings, or so-called four kings.
Oh, yes.
Oh, so
great.
I think there are things that may be very, very worth recalling, because we have sort of suppressed that part of our history because of all the negative aspects it doubtlessly had. But at the same time, there were other things that were quite worth of our notice, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the way in which the Indigenous people are presented in the plays is problematic. They're kind of present, but I think we have to obviously understand those plays as the context in which they're being presented, and the way in which the Creole class of which Sor Juana belonged, you know, was almost kind of using Aztec in particular imagery to kind of present a new identity of you know, of this emerging Mexican people who weren't, you know, were usually not indigenous and not even mestizo, but usually you know, of Spanish ancestry, but because they weren't Spanish born, they were lower in the kind of pecking order. And so, you know, they start obviously having grown up in Mexico and having a different life experience, and also wanting to kind of, you know, start to push probably for independence. They start to create this new Mexican identity, which borrows heavily from the indigenous heritage, and all the while, you know, not treating the actual contemporary indigenous people very well. So it is kind of problematic, but it can be explained. It needs to be explained, and it's obviously part of the history, and it's part of the it's just how things were at that point.
Yes. Then we have another comment. Felicidades a la ponente por tan interesante ponencia. Nos recuerda su producción literaria tan vasta y con temas globales y actuales. That's also true. No? The fact that it is already a global world, no? Mm-hmm.
Yes, definitely. And this is something that we tried to address in that conference that you mentioned, that I will be editing the videos and we'll be able to put them online, where we tried to, you know, challenge this idea of commemoration, and, you know, whose conquest was it? You know, we can call it a conquest, we can call it an invasion, but neither of those kind of really address the role that the indigenous people themselves played within the conquest. So, you know, for the Tlaxcalans, for example, it is very much a conquest as well. But yeah, sorry, I don't know if I'm going off topic now.
No, that's also interesting, because it's good. Well, that may lead us to another question, which is there a presence of the indigenous people in these autos, or of the Nahuatl language at all?
Not in the autos, no. There are indigenous characters in the auto for El Vino Narciso and El Fecho de Josef, but they are allegorical. They're not kind of fully formed kind of real representations, and they don't. It's all written in Spanish. I think Sor Juana only wrote 1 or 2 poems in Nahuatl. There's various ideas around why. Someone argued that, I forget who argued, but that she didn't feel that she could that she had a good enough grasp on the language to do, you know, to write the way she wanted to write. But yeah, unfortunately, you know, these representations of the Nawa in the Loas are very much kind of presenting these grateful converts, which is kind of draws from the missionary literature that Sor Juana would have had access to, and this idea that these people have great potential, as converts, and that they are grateful for being shown the light, if you like, which obviously again is not great in terms of representation.
I was wondering about the Visigoths. Are the Visigoths represented in any way that might be reminiscent of the Mexican peoples, or not necessarily?
No, not really. It's I think Sor Juana was drawing on popular characters for these plays, and at the time the story of Hermenegild was really in fashion. There is a play, a Jesuit tragedy written, I forget now, shortly before the auto, and various other, I think Lope de Vega as well wrote a comedia about Hermenegild, and it's at a time where there's loads of art being produced and poetry, and so I think she kind of capitalizes on well, I mean, there's obviously the deeper meaning of the Visigothic ancestry that she's drawing upon with this narrative of the conquest and conversion process, and how he's, according to that kind of the way it's being presented, Hermenegild starts everything, by being the first Catholic Spaniard, even though actually at the time he's known as a traitor in his own day. There's a huge spin done of Hermenegild in the early modern period. Even kind of Isidore of Seville barely even mentions him. He's a nobody, and if he is mentioned, he's a traitor. But yeah, there's a huge kind of PR spin done of Hermenegild in general in the early modern period, and I think Sor Juana kind of capitalizes on that, because he is this really popular figure, and so hopefully if you write about popular figures, more people will buy your books and read them and put on your plays, hopefully. She was very good at marketing herself and promoting herself.
Wonderful. Okay, would anyone like to ask something or make a comment? Okay, if not, well, we will conclude today's session. Thank you very much, Amy. Oscar Alvarez saying thank you so much for this splendid talk. What an encouraging plus ultra view of Sor Juana. Food for thought. Yes, indeed, Oscar. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
Excellent. And to all of you who have been following us from YouTube and Facebook, thank you as well. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have our second talk of the second module of the Tlaloc project about serpents in El Salvador. So you're all very welcome to attend. It is a series about mythical animals on this occasion, all the Wednesdays of September. So we would love to see you there as well. And have a nice rest of your evening. Enjoy the sun, the unusually sunny evening here in the UK. Thank you for being with us despite, yes. Despite that, though, we need to celebrate the sunlight.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, and goodbye to all of you. And if you could stay just for a minute.
Oh, yeah.